Hello everyone. This is part two of in a series of podcasts that I'm creating in order to actually provide some assistance for you to think about how to go about developing a research proposal. While in part two I focused largely on the rational aspect of it, here I would like to actually take a more global perspective and show to you how I think of a research proposal as a map. That means what components must be there and how they actually relate together in order to create a whole. So again, just like with in part one, I produced this video not necessarily to teach you, because for this you have this PowerPoint, but more like in order to assist you to work with this PowerPoint. So here's our content. And first of all, what I would like to do is to look at research components. Now, I produced this first slide here in order to actually make a point which is already made in part one, but basically I wanted to say we do not work with pure logic, with facts, and in order to produce indisputable answers. There is no such a thing. We work with logic which is culturally and discursively reconstructed. Things seem so according to how we actually perceive reality. Things are not facts. These are our discursive and culturally based ways of looking at reality, and we do not produce indisputable facts or proofs. What we produce is things that work. In postmodern and poststructural approaches to thinking, people talk about research having strategic relevance. Strategic meaning, does this rocket take us to the moon? We can go to the moon without actually knowing anything about the universe, or not enough, right? But we can still make it to the moon. We may even make it to Mars without actually knowing why, how old is the Earth, and all other basic questions. So that brings me to the next point here, which is we actually work with processes, perspectives, and we design our research in a way that makes us make things do things better, and in a way that actually suits the concerns we have. Now, I might go back here. The reason also why I created this map is because there's one issue in research that is always emphasized, but it's not always met. In fact, even in professional research it is not met, which is the accounting for the critical component of your research. Now, while it may seem that it's not a problematic thing, obviously if research is systematic it should actually allow for this critical component, but sometimes we are all humans, sometimes we just miss the places where we should be systematic, and sometimes we just pass things that actually matter. So for example, just only today someone sent me an inquiry about a research project they would want to do for a PhD thesis with us in Charles Darwin University. And the thing is, the person said, I would like to write about the use of ICT and how that relates to 21st century skills. As you instantly can see, the use of ICT is a noun and the 21st century skills is a noun, or both of them. None of this actually describes the process by which this person is thinking of integrating these two things, and there is a good reason for it. So this is why we're doing all this mapping today, to actually find out why is it that we can't just say I want to do ICT and 21st century skills. I already guessed, just simply by looking at this slide, that what we are interested in research is not truths, as I said before, but the processes. We are interested in the processes that take us a step ahead, right? So it's not that we're not interested in how ICT connects with 21st century skills, but the process whereby we could go forward. So we have to define first what forward means, right? And that's the critical aspect of every research. First, we need to define what forward may mean. And how can we define it? By identifying first what forward is not meaning, right? Simple, but needs articulating. And that's where your rationale was, and that's where I will take you now. So to summarize this particular point, the research problem or the research question it's not about saying whether a particular author is right or a particular researcher or but basically what we're looking for are verbs. How do we manage change? How do we support dialogue? How can we build communities of practice, right? So these are verbs. We're looking for processes. Now let's have a look at all of this in a step-by-step manner. So as I said in video 1, I make a difference between developing or drafting a research proposal and actually then taking that draft and using its sections and planting those sections in the into the template. They're two different processes. So here I will just follow this logical drafting sort of way of going about writing a research proposal. And as I said to you before, where what the research actually proposal or a research project is to address is something that is not working, right? Something is not working. And that something typically comes out from you exploring in your literature review, in your rationale, the larger context of the issue that you are investigating, and then indicating particular tensions that are playing themselves out in this context. And then you narrow it further down and you say particular processes are not working and new visions are coming in. So for example, in Nemi's project, what is not working is basically saying that it is okay for a large part of the population to actually have no education. It is not okay. And she demonstrates it why. And the vision that she is addressing is saying, well, whether a person has access to education or not, it's no longer an individual matter. It's not up to that person. It's a community problem. So she's looking in her project into ways how she can actually engage community in order to solve problems which are community problems. Right? So the vision has changed. What the research now does, it translates this vision into a process. For community building, into a process of dialogue in different research projects, right? So into a process that is suggested in the literature as able to address more aspects of the matter than any other or than other, right? So we will be looking now for what people call, whatever they call it, I don't want to introduce, because research has a lot of confusing vocabulary, but basically let's call it, we'll be looking now for visions that enable us to look at the problem differently in a way that addresses more questions, and then in your project you will translate this vision into a specific project, into a specific process that will be relevant to the context in which your research is working. And this you'll identify, or you will name it as your research framework. It's the framework that will inform your experiments and will also stake of your inquiry. What your inquiry will be doing is basically looking at whether this framework actually proved of value, where and where not, right? So there. I will come back to this when the time is right, but now we can actually quite clearly see how things relate to each other. most of the items here you will get from the literature. You will even get the vision. The vision might be conceptualized in terms of a particular approach with principles and a lot of information in it. But now, in order to actually take into account the conditions of a particular research situation in which you will locate your project, you will need to still translate this vision into a process, and this will be your own making. Right, so that will be the innovative, the part of your project. You will be testing how well you did that. You will notice also that as I am working on this video clip, I also am trying to explain to you that these processes and how they actually translate into practice. What you will see is that I actually then, when I actually show you the diagram, I translate it into a text here of how a research problem statement should look like. Now, this is a very cut out and very short and still needs a bit of here explanation, backing up and so on. Now, I took this research project example not actually fully and entirely from another student who did another unit with me. It's a kind of I tweaked his assignment, but I used his main ideas in order to actually do so. And you will be most welcome to actually use phrases from this slide in your own project, just if you decide that they actually work for you. We all actually, in that sense, repurpose other people's projects, and we use their structures and by doing discourse analysis of the elements they insert in their projects, so that we can actually see what is relevant, and we use those phrases and we use those ideas in order to actually build and create new things. So you're most welcome to make as much use of this text as possible. If one of you decides to actually do the whole thing as it is, you're most welcome. I mean, there are no nothing is here solved. All you basically have here is just some text that you can actually retranslate or repurpose to in your new project, or just simply follow up. But you still need to actually embellish it and make it relevant. Okay, so this is just basically an example of how from this I went to problem statement in this particular way. You can read it for yourselves. Now, what I will do now is actually look with you at developing a design of the project. So some elements are still here, but I have added new elements so that you can actually see how to ensure that we maintain the critical concern, the concern with the critical component in our project. So far what we have is a rationale that allowed us to do a number of things. One of them is to actually say what needs repairing. We also have said what kinds of new visions are coming into play, and people say they are relevant for particular things. So we now know what vision we would like to base our project on. We are very much ready to say that we will translate this vision into a particular process and then create a situation which will allow us to evaluate whether this particular new process showed to be valuable, or at least the way we have actually translated it. Now, what we also can firmly state, still in the statement of the problem, but I'm just showing you that the statement of the problem refers to this, 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 and this. We can also say that not only we will test this new process, but we will actually create it, and that will be the framework. Right? We'll create it, and then we will test its value. So that was a statement of the problem, the kind of the introductory things you need for your assignment week 4. Now, you may be also able to go further and do a number of things. Those things will deal with the design of your project. can you actually produce a map of the steps that in your proposal by week 4, the steps that will actually show how you will go about designing your research proposal, designing your research. So here we go. What you will need to do is to, in your research proposal, to, apart from the rationale and all the things we've done so far, is now to look actually into this and this, and then marry this and this to produce this, right? This is very simple. It's visible on the graph, and I'll now describe it in detail what I mean by that. You read the literature, you find out that there will be many leadership strategies for actually building communities of practice. And now it's your job not to choose the ones that are just written to be prototypically relevant and working in schools, if for argument's sake in schools, because this particular project was designed for doing so in a primary school, because it may not be sufficient, it may not be necessarily right. So now what we would like you to do is to identify strategies or leadership strategies that facilitate the building of communities of practice in primary schools in a way that appear to be aligned with the kind of vision that your project is supporting, and therefore with the kind of process that the whole thing is to result in. Right? So we're looking now the leadership strategies for building communities of practice will not be just from the literature that says this is how it's done. It will be from the literature that actually makes links with the vision of the change. Right? So you might actually read even about business and so on, because they might be addressing the same kind of vision, and there may be some ideas that maybe some other people missed. So that's the first thing. And then another thing that we want to do is to explore what quality performance actually means in the context of a primary school. Now I do use it in this particular research project, quality performance with improvement in teaching and learning, because that was, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the ultimate purpose in any school. That's what schools are made for. So what we will be looking here basically is for your articulation of the values or the principles or the objectives in which this vision of enhancement is actually couched. So your section here and here should provide us with some criteria for identifying quality leadership strategies that address this problem, and also quality concerns in primary schools. And then using those quality strategies, we would like you to do what we and these concerns also here, what we would like you to do, I mean, this is, pardon me, I'm just talking like that, but this is obviously for a project of this kind. Now you have to actually, you don't have to, but you can use these ideas to actually translate them into your own project. But I'm just talking about this specific project. What in this project was then necessary is to translate these and these into a framework which is to work in a student-specific context that they are addressing, like their primary school in the Philippines, and maybe not all the objectives here, but particular objectives taken from here to make it actually quite focused, right? So towards specific objectives, very specific objectives, right? And in that way you can actually test it quite nicely, because you're not actually trying to solve all the problems of the world, just a particular set of objectives in your particular context. And this would be one aspect of the limitations of your study, right? It's not a PhD, it's not a book, it's just a little thing. And there will be other aspects here that will come from the methods that you will be using, but I will just talk about it when we get there. So now it's all very cool. You can actually see how all these things relate together, and now what we need to do is actually specify exactly in words all of this, but well, not in words, I use the words, but specify in writing all of this I have actually told you about, right? So I have produced a text. I produced these texts. Now they are not written in stone. Please run them through your supervisors, and we will obviously, after week 4, when you submit your proposals, we will actually give you advice and so on all of that. But these are just helping things to show you how one could go about wording all that story I have given to you here into something that looks like a reasonable research design. Just to assure you that the world is a wonderful place and makes a lot of room for differences, not all researchers agree on anything. In fact, that's the wonderful thing about academia. We actually never agree on anything. So that's a great thing. But we do agree that somehow explicitly the research has to show a map of the relationships and how the critical component is coming in order to ensure that the research is simply not a retelling of the literature. And the way we have accommodated here for the critical component was we have created alignment between the vision and the process that we develop, and also we have tested this process in a particular way that I suggested here in the text. We have tested it, and therefore we could make particular conclusions or particular. I see how I'm trying to be really soft about these statements because they're not conclusions. Again, nothing is written in particular observations regarding the value of this framework, right? So here are some by week 4. I'll just do that. And thank you very much. Nothing perfect, but just a little bit of help. Thank you very much.